Hi, Sydney. Apologies. So I'm guessing everyone is still trying to get home. We'll just wait a few more minutes. We're going to begin. I hope that's okay.
Okay, no problem. Titi, just let me know when you guys are ready.
All right, no problem. Thank you. Okay, so it's 15 minutes in. We're just going to begin and have like most people join us in. I'm guessing it's a Friday, and so everyone is still trying their best to get home. Hi, Sydney. Hi. Let me know that you can see me clearly. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, Titi.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us to do this. It's a pleasure to have you. Sydney is always very busy, and we managed, to get him on this day to do this session. Sydney has worked at multiple OEMs, and he has played a role of a tech consultant, solutions architect at HPE, at Dell, and currently is a channel lead at VMWare, West Africa and Central Africa. I'm a bit jealous. I think I tried getting into VMware at some point. Sydney is passionate about evangelizing, technology, and in the spirit of that, is here today to take us through the A to Z of hardware. Hi, Sydney. Ready for us?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Titi. Can you guys hear me?
Clearly.
Good. So I understand you guys love to have presentation. I get some of us, maybe we're too technical, and most times we like to have interaction because we believe the taste of a pudding lies in the eating. Um, so I think without further ado, I think one of your questions was around the A to Z's of hardware. What are the similarities between tech sales or hardware and software? I mean, Titi, correct me if I'm wrong, because I think you are the
Yeah,
moderator. So,
hardware product, the difference
so
from
what I
software.
want, yeah, what I want to do is that I don't necessarily believe in the presentation, or know that I can present, but then I love interaction where people can ask the questions, particularly if it's a space you've practicalized for over almost more than a decade. It's much easier when you interact with people. So I love it that way. I don't just want to be talking. If you have a questions, I don't know, I think there's a question and answer section. But I think without further ado, I'll probably deep dive into it. So when we talk about software and hardware, the simple answer is that they both need each other. You call it a symbiotic relationship. What do I mean by that? You can have a hardware without a software. Nobody knows the hardware. Take your phone, for instance. And here I'm speaking in general terms for any hardware gear, not necessarily a technology hardware from a B2B standpoint. It could be from a B2C, which is business to consumer, like your smartphones or anything. If you take your smartphone, for instance, it's a gear. In technology, we call it a gear or whatever you want to call it, hardware. That gear is only relevant when you load an operating system on it. So that's the relationship. Now, that's one aspect. The other aspect is what? They both require a lot of time to build. So it's only the software guys who spend a lot of time writing code. In a hardware, for those of you who may have read electrical engineering in communication, you probably have studied what they call the embedded system, where we do a lot of microcode, which is the firmware. So somebody has to write the firmware for the hardware to even communicate to the what we call the overlay. When we say overlay, we're referring to the software that either be it's an operating system and then the application sits on the operating system. So again, it shows that in as much as the coding guy spend a lot of time, the same applies to the guy who is creating the hardware and potentially the other guy who is putting the microcode together to then create the what they call the intermediary layer between the software and then the hardware. The other part is that, of course, when it comes to the commercial part, they are all expensive. You know, hardware is equally expensive, just as the software. They are a necessary part of a computer system. So computer system can also be a mobile phone. So they are, whether it's even if you are dealing with electrical system from elect standpoint of view, you're still dealing with a gear. And so they are all part of a system that allow you to be able to or enable your outcome either commercially or from a technical specification standpoint. So the other part of you probably want to, okay, yeah, so is that when we say symbiotic, are you saying that there are no nuances between the two of them? There are no differences? Of course, there are differences, either tangible or intangible. We will see a software, you can describe a software as something intangible, which you can potentially not feel. But then the hardware, you can describe it as a tangible asset, something you can feel. It's physical, so something that is physical. But then when it comes to software, it's a collection of code. So you write with your hands, and you write codes and put those things together and then string them together to then create what you call your applications or your operating system. Again, that's where the symbiotics start. The software can only function when there's a hardware. So without the hardware, then there can be a software, right? You develop the software through what I call instructions using programming language. But then when you're dealing with the hardware, it's a function of you developing that using electronic and other materials, such as you've heard about microchips. In the advent of AI, everyone is talking about chips. I think this is about far the highest that for a non-electrical or computer engineer, computer science student, we probably would have heard about microchips and how that element is important in today's life. So essentially, those are some of the differences we have when it comes to the two of them. There are several differences that you can see. You can talk about software being you being able to install the software, and then the hardware. You have to couple the hardware to be able to do the software. You need to install it. So just 1 second, guys. Just give me 1 second. No, no, that's fine. Yeah, I'll send it. All right, thanks. Sorry guys. It's been a call, emergency call, so I just have to take that. Okay, so of course the software you can install. A typical example, you have a phone. If the operating system of your phone crashed, what do? You reinstall that. But then if the hardware is crashed, what do? You have to look for the component that is bad. Either as your system board of that hardware, you have to replace it. Those are, again, some of the differences. One physical device you can replace, the other one you have to reinstall. Any questions around that so far? Because I think, again, as I said, I love interactive section. I know TT has a different option, but okay, yeah. Tori, go ahead. I think Tori has a question, right?
All right. Thank you, Sydney. Yeah. Now, in terms of when you're selling hardware tech, right? Most of the hardware components are usually imported, right? Like that's what I believe, anyways. Now, given the FX conditions of the Nigerian market, I believe this would negatively influence the pricing of hardware products, and you would most likely encounter a lot of pricing objections when you're dealing with your customers. So, how do you handle these pricing objections?
Okay. I think I was going to go into that. I was actually more interested in the question around the nuances, but then now you bring, I think that's the next topic. TT, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, before you move on to that, just for the sake of other listeners and people who will be grabbing this recording, and then before you go on to, answer Koi's questions, since it takes us out of here. Koi, please don't forget your question. I wanted to ask how, because we're talking about the differences, right? A lot of people on this call, a lot of people in the community actually used to in software sales, including myself. And so how do you, when you move into hardware, how do people in hardware, have you been able to successfully like translate the technical specifications into business value for customers without losing them in the nerdiness of without losing them in all of those technicalities of buying hardware? So for example, you want to sell cables and servers and things to an enterprise company. Fortunately, most of the time it's supposed to be sold to the technical units, but then unfortunately, right, most times you end up selling it first to the CFOs, selling it first to the procurement committee, who probably don't know jack about cables and things. So how have you been able to efficiently translate all of these technical specifications into business value without losing people's interest, especially non-technical customers, compared to software that you can easily show them screens and fine graphics?
Okay. Again, typically, you asked a very good question. It's a fantastic question. That's something that over the past years, I've seen a lot of people struggle around that, particularly communication, how to communicate the value of whatever they are selling, particularly in the field of technology. I think the first thing that you need to understand here, we're speaking about pre-sales, because it's a combination of sales and pre-sales, because translating the technical requirement or business requirement into technical require the understanding of pre-sales to do that, and then give whatever configuration then the commercial. So I'll put it in 2 or 3 segments. There's a segment for technical, then there's a segment for what we call the commercial part. Now, to a typical procurement person, what is of interest to that procurement person is the commercial part. So if you're having a conversation, the focus for procurement will typically be commercial. What is the interest of a CIO or a decision maker? The interest of a CIO will typically be based on the technical and then the commercial part. He first of all wants to understand what are the values from a technical perspective. Now, those values at the CIO level will typically be not too granular because the granularity is reserved for the people below you. So again, it all depends on the audience, the people you are meeting. If you are speaking to a CIO, CIO is not too much interested in the granularity of the technical details, but he needs the high level of that, and then the commercial part. Then the other part, you also need to equip yourself as someone, either pre-sales or salesperson, is to understand the width. What is the width? What is the need for me? So in that case, what is the need for me? In every buyer decision making, there are two things. One has to do with what's the benefit if you are the one buying for an organization. The first question is, what's the benefit for the organization? The second is, what's the benefit for me, the decision maker? So for instance, if I'm a CIO, or let's say Toyin is a CIO of TSPCommunity, and Toyin has to make a decision in buying a technology that enables your business outcome. First thing Toyin will want to do is that, okay, what I'm procuring first, does it serve the business purpose? There's a business objective, overall business objective. And now overall business objective, Toyin is just, the business is made up of several departments. One of such departments may be IT, of which Toyin is the one who is heading. So Toyin's objective will be to first tie their IT objective to the overall business objective. That is what is in need for the company as Toyin, the CIO, is trying to procure that. So you, the guy who is the pre-sales, you need to be able to read that. First, you take if you are dealing with an enterprise entity, you need to understand the objective of that enterprise entity. So enterprise here, we're speaking of a large organization. You need to understand the objective. If you want to do what we call consultative selling, not the tactical part of selling. So what is consultative selling is the selling type that allows you to be able to win big ticket deals. And those require you understanding the customer's business objective. The next thing is, within that business objective, there are several departments that need to synergize together to be able to attain that. So you then ask yourself, what's the business objective of the IT department? Once you understand that, you then validate that with the IT department. So if you are meeting with the CIO, the next thing is you're trying to communicate to the CIO the value you're bringing and how that help them as a strategic partner to be able to enable the business outcome from an overall company objective perspective. The other part is the high value. The other part is the commercial part. So, all right, fantastic solution. It will meet our requirement. So what is the technical part? The technical part would be what's the commercial part? The commercial part is how much are you willing to negotiate price on? But those are determined to a large extent. I've always said, as a business person, negotiation, you should never be afraid of negotiation. The first thing you need to understand is that, are you satisfied with what I'm offering you? If the answer is yes, then of course we can dwell on that. But to dwell on that, you also need to understand the benefit, what is the need for the CIO. So the CIO's objective first priority is to make sure it aligns with the business objective. The second priority is that when you help that CIO achieve the business, will that either help promote it, or what does it do to his ego from his own growth perspective? If you can understand that, then you are able to tailor that and you can win your negotiation. So that's one aspect of it. There isn't any one size fits all. But then you can always, if you can understand how to carry some of these things, elements, critically understanding the business objectives and the role of IT in meeting those business objectives. If you can get that, the next thing, if you can find out decision maker, the sponsor, what are their motivations? If you can understand those motivations, then the commercial part, it's not a big issue. Now, what I've learned, and then also someone who played the role of a pre-sales in my previous organizations, typically what we see is that procurement people just want to negotiate. There are instances when you negotiate very well with either the ED, if you're talking about bank, most times you're likely going to deal with executive director who is either the decision maker, and then or the budget owner will probably be a CIO, and then the guys who are below are probably the what? Owners of the project. So the owner is someone who is going to be doing that. So there is also something in an enterprise you need to understand is stakeholder mapping, where the critical component of whatever you want to sell. Understand it applies whether be it software sales or be it hardware sales. These are some of the very elementary functions that you need to grapple with and understand those roles and how they interact with each other to be able to land what you call a competitive deal or a big ticket deal. I don't know if I've answered all your questions. I think I've been speaking a lot. So, Tony, yeah, has that answered your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. I think the next is what?
Yes. So looking at, just like software sales, in hardware sales as well, you have the B2B and then the B2C side, right? For the B2C side of hardware sales, how is it different from the B2B? Of course, beyond the obvious, you're selling to consumers and directly consumers, and you're selling to businesses. But what are the peculiarities when you're selling a hardware tech to direct customers, and when you're selling to businesses? Of course, what are the peculiarities beyond the factors, right? The difference in the factors, and then the difference in, of course, the selling method or the sales process.
All right, I think what I would do, because I don't want to go into any person's theory, but I want to come from my own personal experience, because I've also been playing a sales role in a B2B segment. I did a B2C when I was in university, just like any young guy hustling out there. Typically, you either buy a T-shirt and a phone and sell to your colleague. That's a typical B2C, right? Now, one of the differences you'll notice is that if you take, as you said, you work in the enterprise space, either selling software, hardware. One of the things you notice is that selling B2B is it's not as straightforward as when you're selling a B2C. So what do I mean by, for instance, if I want to sell a phone to TT or to it's a straight jack conversation, right? TT is the owner of the budget. TT is the decision maker. TT is typically going to be the sponsor of that. So that is straightforward, right? Because TT is the one who said she needs a phone and she want to buy it. Even if she's buying for somebody, she's still the one who is interfacing. Now, if I have to deal with, let's say, Tony, who is the enterprise guy or B2B customer, there's several layers I have to go through. First, I need to understand. I need to carry out assessment. I need to do an assessment. And then when I'm done with the assessment, I need to try and find out, is there a funding for that? When I get that, I also need to go and do the configuration and then validate that with the customer. And once I validate that, there's going to be also a vendor selection on who needs to submit this. Then there's the pricing part. So you see that there are several layers in that process, the B2B process, as opposed to a B2C. Yeah, somebody will say yes, if you're done. Even if you are done and you create a lock-in where tomorrow they just wake you up. Even if they just wake you up and then call you and say, yeah, we have a strategic roadmap for 5 years, for instance. The second year, even if you get there, you still have to understand utilization, where they are. As opposed to a B2C, do I really care about what's the utilization for TT today? No, TT want to buy a phone. Okay, TT, what specs do you like? Okay, TT. Okay, this is why you need to go for this, which is what So the similarities you can also touch base on scenario in terms of the selling part, the value proposition part. The value proposition side may all be similar, but the route to market, when we talk about route to market, when we say RT and as a route to market, how you go to market is slightly different from that. Because in a B2C, the route to market doesn't typically involve intermediaries. It involves you going there. If you're dealing with enterprise customers from a B2B scenario, you will have different route to market. For instance, you probably have channels in the middle. What is channel? You have a distribution because you're probably sitting outside or you're in Nigeria and then you have to sell to somebody in Kenya. You have a distribution outlet and then the distribution will pass it to a partner and that partner then take it to the customer. Yeah, somebody may counter and say, yeah, but even if I'm selling the phone, the question is if I'm selling the phone, all you do is either as a distribution outlet who is representing you here in Nigeria. But even that distribution outlet, you can choose to bypass that. Or you just walk to any store and you buy your phone. But can you do that in a B2B scenario? That's not the case. Another complication around that is in a B2B scenario, it's seen as a strategy because you are part and parcel of that process or that business. You're not just someone who drops it, because if you are doing a consultative selling where you want to be able to unlock a lot of opportunities within that segment or that particular account, then you have to create a strategic relationship. In the B2C scenario, in most cases, that's not the case. You either come in, you sell, okay, off you go. The worst that can happen is I'm giving you a warranty. But in a B2B, that's not it, because you have to be part and parcel of that business process, the ongoing business of that entity. If you want to be taken seriously and unlock value for the customer and also for yourself, from a revenue perspective, then you have to be part of that. I don't know if I'm making any sense. If I'm not, please pause and then ask questions, because it makes more sense if we interact a lot.
Okay. What I like because a lot of people here are not very, maybe a lot of people are not as familiar with hardware like we are with software, especially in Nigeria. Nigeria is heavily software focused compared to some other parts of Africa, right? Which I'm sure you know by now, because given all of the countries that are currently working with. What's the opportunity like in the hardware space? Is it something where I can focus on from the start of my career to the very end? Is it limiting in terms of career choice, like compared to the other side of tech, which is software?
Okay, so Titi, you are who do you think is a Titi? You are running an organization. You are the topmost salesperson in our organization. Am I correct?
Sorry, what did you just say?
You're running an organization, and you are the topmost salesperson in our organization.
Well, every city is supposed to be a salesperson. So yes, I would say that.
Every CEO is the topmost salesperson of the organization. Now, are there opportunities for you're basically asking a question around the path. Someone choosing to go to a software sales, but someone going to go to a hardware sales. They all have their own different reward systems. Are there opportunities becoming a hardware sales? Of course, you can either become a pre-sales, a hardware pre-sales, or you can either become a software pre-sales, or you can either become a software salesperson or a hardware salesperson. How is the rewarding system like? Or somebody might say, it all depends. There are people in the hardware space having worked in both sides of the coins or the hour, if you want to put it. I will say it depends. So I could be given a target of a $40 million or 48. If I recall previously, our quota was a $48 million in my previous organization. The software sales guy's target is probably maybe $10 million or $2 million in that quota. I may get more commission than the software guy. The scenario vice versa. So there is not one size fits all, right? It all depends on the needs of that particular environment. If you take the ecosystem, what is the largest source software? Typically, you say Microsoft or then what is the largest hardware source? You say Dell, HP. From a hardware perspective, chances are, depending on who is pushing more volumes or more product out there, you might earn more as a sales in any of those organizations, either hardware or if you're a salesperson in software, you might earn more in Oracle or earn more in Microsoft. Again, there's no one size fits all. Are there opportunities? Of course, there are a lot of opportunities. Either you could be a hardware pre-sales, you could be even in the advent of AI still, the robotics that need to perform like humans need to be attended by someone. So you don't have to have hardware engineers or hardware pre-sales. You don't have to have hardware sales people to be able to sell AI robots, right? So there's an opportunity for everyone. Software sales, that's where there might be a challenge. But what's that challenge? Probably you might not get software engineers who are writing the codes, because once the robot begins to rewrite codes themselves and can upgrade some of those codes, then that's where the problem is. But then somebody will also argue that in upgrade of a hardware, can robots also do that? Robots can be programmed to do the same thing. But then somebody has to sell them to institutions, right? We are still going to be, as long as there's going to be trading among ourselves, there's always going to be opportunities in that space, whether hardware or software sales.
Very interesting. I like that you use the numbers as examples. 38, 40 to $2 million are two different things. We're optimizing for huge commission checks. But I just found your problem. I think Dara was talking about it in the session yesterday. That it's not bad if you're optimizing.
Don't be. I mean, I've had instances where you could do a $40 million if you meet your target and above. Probably, normally the way it is that now you also need to understand something about software, and that's also one of the differences between a hardware and a software. The software has to meet a specific needs. Hardware oftentimes are more like a commodity store, right? Let's say TT wants to run an application. TT can get any commodity x86 hardware, right? In an enterprise x86. But Toyin might be a software owner selling probably Salesforce. TLC probably might be selling Oracle CRM. The question will be, what does TT want? If TT wants TLC, what does that mean? That means Toyin may lose out. So software is a need. So oftentimes you can see a hardware person selling a lot of those and make from a revenue perspective. But then the software, when one opportunity comes, that can be a lot for them. And also, when you look at a route to market for software, you realize that unlike hardware where it goes through a lot of, you have to ship and clear software, you don't need to do that. So this is where there is advantage for software. If you're a software vendor, it takes you 48 hours to just release the license. If you're a hardware vendor, you have to look at the logistics part. The shipping, drop it in another country that has to be picked. All these things they involve money. You have to assemble somewhere in one country and then ship it to another country for them to either decouple and couple back. The software is not. You write a code, it's there, it's a license, you release it, it's available on the internet, go download it, apply your license. This is where sometimes there's a margin in terms of profit on a software versus hardware. So someone probably, a hardware might be doing 40 million, but a software guy, when they are nimble, and you have a hardware guy, probably 10 salespeople, and you have 3 or 4 salespeople, and you don't need much You don't need a lot of people selling software. You just need a fewer people and hardware. You probably want to cover as many ground, and you may need a lot. And when you do that, it also affects your bottom line. So again, if you look at that way, your 40 million versus a 10 million revenue for a software guy might potentially earn more than the hardware guy. Where it might sometimes benefit a lot is if you have a top sales guy versus a top sales guy in software. The top sales guy in the hardware potentially might get high commission versus the sales guy in the software, primarily because the software might be meeting a need versus a commodity system. Yeah. Any questions so far? Is it interesting for everyone? Or shall I start calling names? Wumi, you want to? Oh, yeah. So, Wumi, you want to ask the question? I like people to interact. I've heard the voice of Toye. We are small, so we should be able to interact. Wumi, what's your question? Or shall I throw the question at you? Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Um, Everything you've been saying, yeah, it's quite understandable. So, here is my question. So, I want to ask that. Okay. How can I, okay, increase like customer retention in hardware business? Like,
Customer retention in hardware business.
yes.
I see a lot of clap. Look, mhm, that's a fantastic question, Wumi. The truth is, I won't say it's a walk in the park. I haven't
Okay.
gone through that. It's really not a walk in the park. You know, you can never satisfy customers. Customers will always come sometimes threatening you, they want to throw you up. There's one key element of fundamental, which if you hold that properly, you'll always retain your customer. One, your post-sale support is critical. How, even if that thing is not broken, how often do you interact with this customer? And that's why I've always said you ought to approach selling from a strategic mindset. And if you approach selling from a strategic mindset, then you can have a consultative selling. Then the people see you as part and parcel of that process, not someone who drops. And if you can have that, that's an emotional part you are appealing to people's emotion. In one of your write-ups, TP, you talked about B2C being emotional part and appealing to somebody's emotion. It's not just a B2C, you're appealing to people's emotion. Even the B2B, you want to do that, particularly when you're in front of the decision makers and those who are the owners of the project. Because what you communicate and what you do is equally critical. Particularly what you do, your actions are much more critical than what you communicate when you want to retain a customer. So if you can sweet talk a customer, but then if your actions are at variance with what you are talking to the customer, and then chances are you're not going to retain them. So if you're telling a customer that, hey, I'm going to provide after sales support, make sure you use that. Sometimes there are areas where you lose, but then because of how you strategically position yourself with this customer, you can recoup down the line. That's also one adoption. You must also have a mindset that it's not every time you win. There are instances that you are bound to lose. So you need to understand the environment well and be willing to give it. It's called quid pro quo because the person on the other side of the file, no matter how hard he's negotiating, also reckons that you potentially also need to win. He cannot win all the time. But what can get you constantly moving is your ability to understand the psychology of his business. And this, what I mean by psychology of his business is basically understanding what he stands for, where he's going, and play that complementary role. Never try to usurp his role. But then the most important thing you're trying to do is to say, for him to see you as someone who is complementing his effort to get to that destination. And if you can do that, you're likely going to retain your customers. Put it this way, TT, you and I, or TT and I are your customers. You are a B2B customer. TT and I are selling to you. TT sells, I sell to you, but then I constantly approach you to check on the environment. Oh, how is the business doing? How is the technology? Is technology performing? Is there anything we can do to improve? Is there anything we can do? You probably might say, oh yeah, you need something. But at some point you also give in. But here is TT. TT comes, sells, she goes. TT only comes back when there's an opportunity for another RFQ. Between myself and TT, which one of us would you want to be your preferred partner? Is it gonna be me or TT?
Yeah, you of course.
Exactly. Why? Because I'm there constantly. So again, there's no
Yeah.
size feature. However, are there fundamentals? They're fundamental. Those fundamentals are just understanding the strategic goal of the customer and aligning yourself, seeing your organization as a strategic partner to that customer. It's very critical. And also be mindful of the fact that customers are always not going to be happy every time. There are times they even want more, but then it's also your ability to be able to balance between how much you're pushing in versus how much they are giving you. You should be able to know when to say no and when not to say no. You should also be able to identify that. You should be able to read. No one can tell you this one size fits all, but you should be able to read that environment, and that can only happen when you're constantly around that person. What that means is that when you are constantly in front of someone and helping the person, even if you get cantankerous at some point, the person, when he goes back, you also think twice and say, hey, this guy has always been with me all the time. He's always through thick and thin. So that's how we do it. In my previous role, I give you one of the largest banks who grew inorganically. When I say inorganically, acquire another bank. And what we did was basically we were competing. We reckon that it's a competition with other OEM. The bank that is coming to join the existing one had the rival competitive product. The bank that is acquiring has not just my own product, but then also the rival competitive product or competition. What did we do in that case? We had to start appealing to the decision makers right from the get-go. So by the time the competition realized we were way ahead, and we were showing the customer, oh, this is a strategy. Okay, what do you want to do? We listen to them. And always remember to listen more to your customer. Speak less, because if you speak less, they give you more. You should also know when to set open-ended questions as opposed to you trying to set questions and try to answer them at the same time. But then set questions that people have that liberty to speak more. Then you can absorb, and then come back and dissect and be able to meet their needs at any given point in time. And the point I was making, when we took that approach, at the end of the day, we beat the rival. Today, for 5 years in a row, we consistently have business with that customer. So every quarter, there's either $1 million deal that is coming out of that contract. So that's also one way, understanding that psychology of customers' habits to be able to come from a strategic partnership as opposed to a tactical partnership where you just sell or drop and then go. But also your ability to read, understand their business objective, where they want to be in the next 5 years or in the next 10 years. And then remember, you understand their strategic objectives. In the next 5 years, they probably want to grow their customer base to maybe 100 million. Okay, they want to grow that. There are several elements that needs to come together, or several pieces of that puzzle that need to join together to be able to get to that. So you're having that, and then also coming to the table as a strategic partner to a unit that also foster the attainment of that objective is critical. So come from that strategic mindset and always also have a mindset of it's not every business you need to win. There are times you lose, and there are times you also win. Have I answered your questions?
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you so much. I understand. Thank you.
So,
Okay, thank you so much, Sydney. Do you have any? Does anybody other person have any questions
yeah, Ahmed.
before we round
Ahmed,
off?
go ahead.
Hi, Sydney. Good evening.
Good
It's
evening.
evening here. I don't know what the time is over there. But thank you for an amazing session so far. It's been really insightful. So my question is, how volatile are the market drivers that influence sales in hardware compared to software? So take for instance, if I sell remittance APIs, right? Things like influx of people into Nigeria, probably during festive season, naira volatility, FX play, immigration, just inbound remittance activities, things like that would, be market drivers that influence what sales would look like for my APIs. Similarly to if I was selling payment APIs. So are the market drivers for hardware sales volatile, especially in your industry, or is it a lot stable? And how does this affect sales?
Fantastic question. I think we are turning the question at us. We are turning this session also into business and technical, which is what I like. You are spot on. So it's not only API, the guy who is bringing everything together, right? It's not only from there. Once there's a current currency volatility, I think it has a snowballing effect in the sense that it affects all of us. So I give you an example. And I know I'm in the software industry now, but the guys on the other side of the aisle, that's the hardware guys, are also feeling it how. For us, dealing with B2B, it's a major hurdle for us. If you look at the past 6 months down till date, we've had to battle from 400. I think let's move backwards. Let's say potentially 1.5 years, where we've had to move from 400 naira to $1. Look at the budgeting cycle. Now, if you know big ticket deal, you know the big budgeting cycle for customers, it's either 3 to 4, 5 months. Now, for them to budget, then you also have to present a quote. When you present a quote, and then the volatility of the currency is a major issue. One, you also need to understand that the hardware is largely imported from outside. We don't produce, neither do we assemble an HP hardware, neither do we couple a Dell hardware. We have to import it. So anything that affects currency would potentially impact the purchasing power of any business. Because, for instance, their budget was at 400, maybe the budget was $2 million at a rate of 400. Now, when they budgeted, it is now moved to potentially 1,500. What that means is that now they have to take more naira because their revenue is in naira. So if your revenue, you are generating 100 billion naira revenue. Previously, when it was 400, you're only taking 40% or 30% of that in operational expenses from hardware or software. Now, what's going to happen is that you're generating the same revenue, sometimes even less, but then you have to take more from that revenue to service either hardware by way of upgrade or software by way of licensing renewal. And you have to pay in dollars. So now you have to convert at 1,500. So the truth is, yes, it's affecting us. If you look at, you've heard MTN, which declare operational. I'm not sure any of you deal with them from either selling software or hardware. If you notice, for the past 2 years, they've scaled down their CapEx, which is capital expenditure on any product that needs to be imported, as far as technology is concerned. They scaled that by almost 80%. Why? Because of the currency volatility. Even though you might hear them declaring or generating more revenue, probably declaring high profit, but then that profit, if you look at it vis-a-vis expenditure, it's eroding because they have to take bulk of it. So at the end of the day, what they are doing is that they have to optimize internally by scaling down in some of their IT purchases. So that it's been difficult, not just for an API salesperson, but then also from a software and a hardware sales perspective. Does that answer your question, please?
Yes, very clear. Thank you.
Yeah, Umi,
For
I
yourself.
think oh yeah, Tony, go ahead.
All right. You mentioned something about giving after sales services when you answered Adumi's question. So my question is, how then do you price your products or your services? So if it is a flat fee, how do you manage like after sales services subsequently? So I'm asking this because in one of my previous roles, we used to deploy POS terminals or sell POS terminals to merchants. And the logistics of that alone cost a lot of money. So if you're charging a flat fee, how then do you recoup the costs from those after sales services?
Okay. Your question is, if I recall correctly, it's if you are charging, I guess it's a follow-up to the currency volatility. Am I correct?
It's a follow-up to your answer on for Adumi in terms of after sales services.
Okay. In terms of after-sales services.
Yeah, so
So,
how do you price your products considering that you will still um, offer after sales services to your customers if you charge a one-time fee?
here you are talking about you being the one selling, right? So I'll take you to how it happens in my world, either hardware or software I'm selling today. So typically, how do we satisfy the customers? When we talk about strategic, yeah, let me just give you an example of a typical B2B enterprise, as Titi rightly said. If I'm coming to sell my hardware, the guy probably is spending $1 million. So what do? It doesn't cost me to, and in every sales, you do what they call discounting. Am I correct? So you could package maybe now your typical support in a hardware and software environment, it's around 20-25% of your hardware cost. So what I mean is that if you are selling a hardware at a cost of $1 million, 25% of that, which is about 250K, will be for your support, or 20% or 15%, depending on the organization. And then there is also something called the on-site residency, which is also about 5 to 6% of that. So what that basically does for you is that 6% of your hardware cost, what we call the MSRP, or your selling price. Now, what that does is that you have two options. Either you pass that to the customer in your final negotiation, or you leverage on your discount. So if you are permitted to, let's say, give a discount of maybe 50-60%, you could potentially take 50% out of that and spread it on, or use it to cover things like residency. That allows you to station one of your engineers on site who potentially or consistently hold or take some of those heavy lift off the customer. So in that case, you've already passed the cost to the customer and only consuming it as you progress along. And once the guy is there, and if the customer is happy from the get-go, the subsequent ones, your second year, you probably can then pass the cost to the customer. And then because the customer is happy, it's never difficult for the customer to pay. So in my field, we have what we call a technical account manager, that we we pay the customer pay a certain amount. It could be about 50K. Let's say for the purposes of this conversation, let's say $50,000 annual. That's what the customer pays. It allows assets that that guy will constantly be on the customer side and make sure anything that has to do with our product is able to service our customer. If the customer, instead of logging the case themselves, the guy will step in and help the customer log the case. Or the customer logs the case and the guy is the one who sits and makes sure they coordinate. The idea behind that is to take those heavy lifts off the customer and allows us to take that whilst he focuses on the major or the core of it. And so there's several ways. One, initially you can absorb the cost, and second one, second year you can pass it on. How do you absorb that cost? Either through your discounting. If your business allows you to do 30%, you can withhold 10% and give out 20%, or you can factor in as part of your initial cost to the customer. Because your renewals are either hardware or software is yearly or 2, 3 years or 5 years later. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you so much.
Okay. I think
Okay.
TT, the next question is what? How do you pitch? Am I correct?
Oh no, we've already covered most of that in
Okay.
all of the things that you mentioned. Beyond direct sales roles and then pre-sales that you have mentioned a number of times, what other roles can sales people transition into that are opportunities in this side of tech? I do know of I think solutions engineering or sales engineering. Yes, I know we have that for software as well, but I also know that it's a thing for hardware as well. And what other roles are available that regular sales people could transition into within the hardware space?
Of course, there are several roles available within the hardware space. One of such roles can be an account support manager. Depending on the organization, if you are in Dell might call it SAM. That's or if you are in HP, they might call it ASM. So basically, account support manager or some support account manager, depending on which organization you are. There are also roles like the backend role. Everything is all about field. There are people who need to do the configuration, go into and do the administrative, put those pieces together. If you go take technical business requirement, translating them into technical, somebody is either a solution architect who is either putting them in a drawing format. Don't ever feel architects who design a house. In the field of technology, we also have that because they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So the way we communicate most times is how we draw to ensure how those pieces are able to piece together in the environment when they come to be able to then deliver on those mandates they're expected to deliver on. There is also what they call you also have back-end supports like inside sales. Their job is not necessarily going to the field to sell, but then your job is to pick up a phone and respond to someone who probably want to reach out to your organization. And so more like the first level to allow customers who want to speak to your sales people to be able to do that. That's also one. There is another part called the microcode firmware. So if you are in the US or those advanced society, another role is the people who put those microcode or the firmware together, because every hardware has what they call the firmware. So which is the software, the microcode. If you've done electrical engineering or computer, you understand what the microcode is. But if you don't, take it like today in an API. What's the API doing? Taking the information and making sure two functional systems can handshake or speak together. In the realm of a hardware, for a OS to sit on a software, it needs to be able to understand. So if I'm speaking French, you're speaking English. I don't understand English. I only speak French. You speak English. Take it like there's an interpreter in between us, being able to then interpret for all of us to understand what we are communicating. That's the role of a firmware in that layer. There are engineers also. There's engineering role for that, and then there are people whose job is to do patching. Basically, they sit at the back end and can patch the system. There are what we call also field support engineers, also in a hardware. So their job is to go and then do what we call break and fix. And then they also what we call the implementers, those who, when you deliver the hardware, somebody has to come and install it. So that's also a role. They call them the customer engineer, depending on the organization. And HP might call it customer engineer. IBM has a different, they call it field engineer. And Dell will call it also a field engineer or SC or solution engineer. So there are all kinds of roles available. There's also called the architect role, just to design it and then pass it on to the pre-sales who will then do the configuration. So there's beyond the pre-sales and sales, there's architects, technical architects, there's a project manager role, there is an implementation engineer, and then there's a support engineer. That's in the hardware space. Similar in the software space, you also have a solution architect. For software, you also have technical architect for software. You have a project manager in the software. You have implementation software engineer. You have a support software engineer, which they're two different people, by the way. One support, one just implement, while the other one support. So the one who support doesn't do much, doesn't understand much about how it's deployed, but he does know a lot about how it's support. The same way the guy who deployed doesn't know much about the nuances, the too many problems he introduces in the environment people have to fix.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I didn't know they were that much, but learned something new today. Thank you so much, Sydney, for making time out for this. And thank you so much for everyone that joined, especially on a Friday night. We typically don't have session on Friday night for obvious reasons, but everyone took time out to join. If you're new on this is your first session that you're attending with us. This is hosted by the Tech Sales and Partnerships Community. It's a support, I call it a support group and a haven for people in revenue focused roles. I've just dropped our link to our Slack channel in the chat box. And then, yeah, this session is recorded and it's going to be on our YouTube page. And also it's going to be dropped in the community as well. Thank you so much, Sydney, for joining us. I'm dropping Sydney's LinkedIn profile for everyone that wants to connect with him. I hope you do not mind.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, Sydney Sosoo. Okay, thank you so much again, Sydney. Have a lovely evening. Thank you so much for everyone that joined and asked insightful questions. Right, thank you so much. Really helped us to enjoy the session more. Have an amazing evening, everyone. Have an amazing end of February. Happy New Month in advance and have a fun weekend. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Sydney. Really appreciate